All right, part 2 of this evening coming up. Hello everyone, my name is Maria Takalanda, and on behalf of the Geelong Regional Libraries, I'm delighted to welcome you to the finale of the Local Word Writing Festival. Before we begin, I would like to start by acknowledging the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation and the Gulidjan and Gabanud peoples of the Maar Nations as the original owners of the lands on which our library services operate. We pay respects to elders, past, present and emerging. We acknowledge and celebrate First Nations people of this land as the custodians of learning, literacy, knowledge and story. Now, I'd like to introduce you formally. We already know a little bit about Jayne after tonight's performance. But I'd like to introduce you formally to the star of tonight's one-woman show, Jayne Tuttle. Jayne is a graduate of Melbourne University, the National Theatre Drama School and the Jacques Lecoq Theatre School in Paris. She's worked internationally as a playwright, copyright and translator. In 2021, she and fellow Lecoq graduate John Bolton, who I think is here with us this evening.
He's gone, actually.
He's gone off, didn't hang around, but he was here. Developed Paris or Die, the first of Jayne's 2 memoirs, into the solo theatre performance that we saw tonight, but which has also toured regional and urban venues, including La Mama. Please join me in welcoming Jayne again to the stage. Jayne, I imagine you'd very much like a rest after that performance, but that's a bit of bad luck for you because you don't get one. But
I think you all need a rest.
in some ways, I think that recovery surely is easier than preparation. I mean, how do you prepare for a show like that where you have to revisit the grief of losing your mum and then the trauma of that awful accident in Paris? How do you prepare to perform those things for people?
With lots of rehearsal and a lot of work with, it's a shame John's not here, but now he's not here, I can kind of talk about him a little bit more because he gets a bit shy. A brilliant director. So John helped me put the play together from the book, the raw material of the book, which, you know, the raw material of the book is already a translation from the actual events, and then the play is like another step in that translation. And so working with John takes it another step away from me and my experience, I suppose. So although it's very close, obviously, to the bone and to my experience, it still feels like I'm out there performing a show, any show really. So preparation-wise, it's a lot of... The reason that I could probably come and do it at all is just because of the extent of work that was done with John at such a intensive... John is a real hard taskmaster. I can say that because he's not here. He works me like... And that's the familiar language of the Lecoq school, I suppose. It's like, it's not about you, get to work, do the work. And that's just such a wonderful thing to have as a language.
Well, that's really interesting to hear. And I know a little bit about writing, but I don't know anything about acting. And, you know, so just working with the kind of, myths you hear about actors, the method school of acting. And so I had always imagined that when you act something, you really have to be, reliving it, feeling it. Is it like that, or is it just about finessing the exterior, finessing the action? What's the balance there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. It's something that I think every performer is kind of different, and actually in the play I really explore that. For me, I went to a traditional theatre school in Melbourne, and it really wasn't working for me because a lot of it was working from a more psychological place rather than a physical place. And at the Lecoq school, which is completely, there's no moment of the entire time you're at that school that you're ever thinking. The whole idea is abandon your head and get into your body, and that will tell you where you need to go emotionally. So it was a real relief for me to start working that way. So performing this show, if I put my body in the places it needs to go, I can find the way into the feelings that I need to explore and that I'm interested in exploring.
Right, yeah, that's fascinating. And I'll get you to tell us a little bit more about the Lecoq School, because what struck me as someone who doesn't know anything about acting, okay, I'm just going to come out with it, I don't, but reading this memoir was a real education in understanding, different, I suppose, approaches to acting. And the Lecoq School, it strikes me as one that is incredibly physical. The focus is on the physical. I mean, you were doing, cartwheels and flips and all kinds of stuff as part of the training. Why?
Yes. Well, actually, you become like an athlete at that school. It's a bit like, I used to say it's like the Russian ballet of theatre. You can't, when I came out, and actually they say that's one of the reasons I survived the accident, is because I was so fit. My body was I looked like Linda Hamilton, out of Terminator.
Nice.
Because and the idea behind that is that the actor isn't, the actor is there to carry the idea. So physically, the actor spends their time training their body in order to be able to embody these grand emotions. And it's very much the Lecoq School is very much a school of theatre, although a lot of great actors of film and television have come out from that, like Geoffrey Rush or, that amazing Spanish guy, I always forget his name. Anyway, there's lots of... one of the reasons I wanted to go to the Lecoq School was because of Geoffrey Rush. I wanted to be an actor that did what he did, which is to, of course, unfortunately, Geoffrey's a bit out of favour at the moment, but as a subject, but like the way that he would disappear into his characters and into his roles, and he's doing that physically. So he's not doing the the traditional method thing where what was it, Brando said, or Brando, who was it that said, why don't you just act? Yeah, so it's a very different way of working, and it was excellent for me because it took me out of my head. I was already stuck in here because I probably was headed towards writing, so I was already thinking too much, and it just blasted that out and gave me so much freedom to then explore and to make mistakes and to see what this particular being could do. And that actually sort of ended up the way that I attack writing as well, because it's a similar, there's a muscularity and a physicality to writing that I think we often forget because we generally sit there like this. But we're embodying characters all the time. And if we can't imagine them physically or play with them physically, then how do we bring them to life?
No,
that was a bit random.
That's an interesting parallel. No, someone remind me to take that up with Jayne in a moment, because I've still got one more question about acting.
Yeah, great.
And so the Geoffrey Rush thing is really useful to me because he does strike me as a very physical actor, almost kind of a clown or a mime, almost. So now I get that now. Thank you for that. So another thing that you mentioned in your stage show, and you mentioned in the first memoir, is that idea of juiced.
Yes.
That somehow getting it just right. And you're comically confused by this in the book. It's a great piece of writing. But in the second book, My Sweet Galantine, and I highly recommend both of these books to you. They're just really something special as memoirs in the way, like the show, they balance, the comic, the authentic, but also, the deeply tragic, dealing with, matters to do with grief and trauma and such things. Tonally, they're something of a miracle. But getting back to my question, which has to do with juiced, okay? But in the second book, you talk about something called duende, which is a different... I'm going to let you explain. What is the difference between these two things, and how have they informed your performance tonight?
Thank you for asking that. Juste is almost... I never thought about those two ideas in relation to each other, but I think that to be able to find duende, you need to somehow find what's juste first. So juste is something that's very physical. You can't just be juste. You need to actually find, it is a physical thing. Like I sort of try to explain in the play where there's something about it, it just hits you, and you know when you're doing it. There's a moment where you're like, oh, I think that might be juste. I didn't get anywhere near juste for a whole year at the Lecoq School. I maybe had a few windows of it in the second year, a few tiny moments of like, oh, I think that was juste. And duende, so duende was something that came along later for me, and it was something that Matt, my husband, really introduced to me, which is that the idea, this Spanish idea of the little naughty spirit. So the duende is something from Spanish folklore, where the duende is the little spirit that comes and does naughty little things. And then Lorca took that idea and started to talk about the idea of having duende. And so duende being this sort of, it's like a mix of the dark, it's very close to death, but it's also like got this light in it. So it's this interplay. I mean, he says, there's this fantastic thing he writes about, like how the artist has to always remember that any moment ants might eat him, or a giant arsenic lobster might fall from the sky. It's just so enlightening because it makes you remember to not take yourself seriously, and also to remember death. Death has got to be present, and also light. So Matt and I will always, often it's really helpful to read about duende, because then when you're watching things on, I don't know, movies or listening to music, you'd be like, it's really good, but it doesn't have duende. Nick Cave talks about duende, and I feel like he talks a lot about it in the sense of darkness and love songs. And that's not the reading of duende that I had from reading the texts. I feel like it's more about, I mean, I think that's a reading of Lorca's duende, idea of duende. But there's also this other thing of, it's the naughty, it's Fleabag has duende. Mm-hmm. You know, that sort of like, she's always watching, and there's always this feeling of death, even though it's very light. I don't know why I thought of Fleabag then, but there's something about, it's very, very, very rare. I really encourage you to read about it, and it's a sort of great measure of like, it's my dream to try and create something with duende. That's the goal.
I think you're getting there, I think
just a touch, I'd be so happy.
And I love that reference to Fleabag as well. That really exemplifies that kind of a performance for me too. Okay, so I'm going to get back to that connection now between acting and writing. You do both. I mean, it's just extraordinary. I don't know any other writer who could get up on stage and perform their book. So you talked about in writing how you have to inhabit a character on stage. Obviously, you're doing that. What's the difference there? Is it about the physicality? But you said writing is also physical. What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know. I don't know why. I feel that they go together. Like writing, with the beautiful thing, after being in theatre for so many years, the saddest thing about theatre is that you perform and then it's gone, and that's the most beautiful thing about it as well, because it's this moment of life and death right there. Like there's no way tonight that performance is done. I might be able to do I might do the show for another year, but that was life and death. And the sad thing as an actor is you don't, unless you do film, which I've never really done, you don't get to keep anything. And again, that's the beauty of life, and that's why I love theatre. But there's something really great about a book, like that lives, and I don't know, tonight someone will take it home and give it to someone else, and then maybe in 5 years they might open up the book and read it, and maybe they throw it in the bin. I don't know, but it's got this longevity, which is really exciting for someone like me who's been living this life of little fires that are just... And so I like duende of it. I like the duality of that, you know, because I can come out and share and actually be with people tonight, and then next week I'll be shut up in my room again, completely alone, writing a book. So it's a nice combination. And I also feel that the theatre tells you, you know, straight away if you're dying or if there's some spark. Whereas with a book, you don't really know. But I try and think as I'm writing, like, am I keeping the attention? Would the audience sort of, you know, start to drift off at this point? And if so, how long can I allow that before I need to bring them back?
Yeah, now that is an advantage, isn't it?
Yeah.
As a writer, you're forced to consider your audience because of that theatre background. It comes naturally to you to think of they're very engaging books, so that's paid off. That's really, really interesting. So in terms of writing the memoir, and we'll talk about the first one, so you refer in the stage show to having that pile of notes. How did the memoir come out of that? How did you find your through line,
With great difficulty.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember cursing the notes many times because a bit like, Helen Garner talks about this a lot, you know, and actually I was really relieved when I read her Yellow Diaries and she uses the word shoehorn. She's like shoehorning the little pieces of life that she's gathering as she moves through her life, the little notes. And I always felt really bad because I was a bad writer because I didn't want to do plot. I just wanted to like get the little bits of life that I'd gathered and stick them into some kind of form. And that was such a relief when I read that that's what she's doing as well. So it was really hard. I remember that, I never imagined this as a memoir either. I really thought I was making a novel for a very long time, and I desperately wanted to push it as far off myself as I could as well. So I tried every which way to write the book, whether I tried it being a girl called Greta, whose mother was a lepidopterist or something, and, you know, like, I tried everything. I tried writing it from the perspective of the dead woman. I tried writing it from the perspective of the French guy. I spent 15 years working on it before it was published, so it was sort of a... But the notes were a real bane, and I remember thinking after Paris or Die, I'm never writing like this again. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write from that. I'm going to plot it out, and, you know, like, nah, it didn't really work like that. That's just where I find it fun, the notes.
But I think the notes, their power is in the narrative because there's such a sense of presence, you know, because when I first started reading, like, how did you remember all of this?
Oh, yeah.
There's, you know, the details, you know, make you as a reader so present in those moments that you're experiencing. So I'm glad you didn't throw away the notes.
Yeah, so they still kind of keep creeping into other things as well. It's sort of,
right.
It's interesting. I'm glad that I don't keep them anymore though, and I keep thinking, well, what am I going to do down the track if I don't have notes?
Yeah.
I have to make stuff up.
Yeah.
That's too hard.
And at what stage did you first conceive of this as a stage play? Was it well after the book was done and dusted, or was it during it, or before, or what?
Yeah, so the book came out in December 2019, and then we were in lockdown in March 2020. And I did launch Paris or Die in Melbourne and Sydney, but then I was going to tour a little bit around, and that was all, you know, that was not going to happen. And it was a bit of magic, actually. I live in Point Lonsdale, and there's a art space down there, and it was all shut up. And the woman who was running it said, hey, you could probably come along and mess around with if you wanted to make a one-woman show. And I remember thinking, oh, that's what I've always wanted to do. It's too scary. And John, I heard a rumour that this legendary director, John Bolton, who I knew exactly who he was living, he lives in Williamstown, but he has a holiday house in Point Lonsdale, and he was spending lockdown there. And I said, I wonder if John Bolton would direct the play. And we got together. He had read Paris or Die, and I said, I'd always been curious as well, like, with festivals like this, I remember thinking, what could you do? And also, what could I do that's more, because I spent 5 years training as an actor. What could I do to bring the book to life? And so I was already sort of thinking maybe there's something more theatrical that I could do. So we just got together once a week in this little hall and with our masks on, like distanced, and started messing around with like, what could this be? Would it be a reading, or would it be with actors, or, would it just be like a... And then we worked on it for quite a long time, and then finally we were like, we've got an hour-long show. And then we slowly started doing it at the hall, and it was that period where it was like, suddenly it was locked down, we had to cancel. Then we were allowed to have 12 people in the space, and so there were 12 people, and then the place was full, and then it was locked down again, everyone was sitting in masks. Then remember there was that time when, you're allowed to be in a little cluster, and so I remember going out and clustering the seats according to the plan of who had booked. And then, we just sort of toured it around and just kept it, it's just constantly evolved.
Yeah, well, we saw one iteration, and as you suggested earlier, that will never be repeated. It had never existed before tonight. That was just that special moment that we got to experience, which is a wonderful thing. Look, both of these memoirs, they're set in Paris, and of course, they're both love stories, right? They're set in Paris, of course they're going to be love stories. But they're also books in their own ways about toughening up. And what does it take to live in Paris? Is it useful to be a romantic if you live in Paris, or do you in fact have to be a bit of a tough bitch? What's your take on it?
Yeah, and I'm really grateful. You have to be a tough bitch, and I'm grateful for the time. Like as I described in the play, when I arrived, I was so, and I really grew up pretty fast in that experience. But then learning to ask for what you want, learning to be direct and to not... the French are interesting. They don't see... we think, oh, I'm so friendly, how could they be so rude? They actually don't see it like that in general. They actually think you're being disingenuous and quite, actually rude yourself if you're too over the top. You order your baguette. You come in to get your baguette. You don't need to ask me how I feel about the weather. Just take your baguette. That's polite. And so it's a good place to grow up, because it's a tough city. It's a complicated, deeply complex place. And one of the reasons I was interested in writing 3 books about it is to show the evolution of a woman in that place that has a desire to lose a part of herself, I suppose, and to try and to do something different from where. I mean, I guess a lot of the books are a lot about fleeing the difficulty of living in your own city or your own place when your whole perspective on life has changed. And so I just was interested in this 10-year period in Paris, and it's a very and trying to live with a injury is extremely difficult, and trying to live with a child is complicated, and that's where I'm headed with the 3rd book. But it's a great wake-up call to the big world and the reality of, I'm always interested as well in the place. We do have a vision of this, snow dome and, but the actual reality of living somewhere like that is certainly, as Dad always says, actually, Dad's always like, oh, it's good to visit, but then actually living here is a different thing. It's still fantastic though. Still lots of great stories to tell.
To dwell a little bit longer on the challenges of living in Paris. So, I mean, I'm going to talk about your accident now. So the memoir, the first volume, introduces us to the accident, and the second volume is really about the aftermath, which is significant. It's more, I think, about dealing with the trauma of that. And one of the ways in which you come to finally deal with the trauma is to take some kind of legal action. And can you tell us about how you came to do that, because you did it reluctantly, but there was a particular moment that convinced you needed to do this.
Yeah, this is one of the things I love the most about Paris. Is it doesn't, as opposed to the rest of the world. Well, you know, places like America and Australia, I suppose. The idea of safety is very different. You know, like life is. There's more. I've always felt I really liked being in Paris because I always had this feeling that I was living a bit closer. People were more lived more consciously with the idea of death and sadness, and you know, or in the winter, like sometimes you'd walk down the street, and people would be crying because it was so shit. You know, like I don't know. I felt like I felt more at home in the sort of emotional landscape of somewhere like that. And so it was really weird for me when something happened to me that really challenged my, like I didn't want to be safe. And then my accident happened and I was like, you know, I'm an idiot. That just happened and I shouldn't have stuck my head over the banister. But then I started to think a little more. I felt worried about other people, happening to other people. And then it did happen to someone else, a young boy, and he didn't survive. And so I felt, I just didn't think I could go on with my life if I didn't do something. And it was ridiculous, like to do something like that, like to sue a French building is a very un-French thing to do. French people don't tend to, you know, they don't have such a, what's the word? Compensation. Litigious, thank you so much. They don't have such a litigious attitude towards things. But I still felt like if I didn't do something, I would be living for the rest of my life feeling guilty that I left something so dangerous open to other people. And so I'm glad that I did it in the end. I'm actually really glad. It was very traumatic, but probably really good psychologically. It was pretty tough. Dealing with that lawyer, Hogarth, you know. But yeah, it was very complicated to do that, and it was almost like taking on the French psyche in lots of ways. The things that we love about France, you know, the crumbly little stairwells with holes in them, so sweet. The potholes and the ridiculous traffic laws, and stepping out on the green man thinking you're not going to get run over. Like, you know, in the book Hogarth says, I look after stupid Australians all the time. They get off and look the wrong way and get hit by bikes, you know, hit by, what do you want, you know? But it was it was a complicated thing to do, but it sort of made me have to think deep inside myself what I thought was the right thing.
Yeah. I mean, and for those of you who haven't yet read the first memoir, you might want to explain the situation with that lift, which is, I believe, installed much later than the building was built.
Yeah, they kind of plonked in there in the middle of the, you know, the old stairwells. Actually, I was watching Blue, the Juliette, you know, the Krzysztof Kieslowski trilogy, and there's a moment where Juliette Binoche is walking up the staircase and you just see the elevator rising in the middle. It's in the mid-century, they just installed these lifts into the middle of the stairwells. So they sort of just plonked them there. And most of them have these cages that go around them all the way up, floor to ceiling, but some of them just had banisters that were built in the 50s for little, you know, petites parisiennes or petits parisiens. And, you know, I towered over this banister, and it was a very cultural thing to lean over a banister as well, I realised later on. You know, it's something that we grow up in Australia in houses with stairs. That's what I grew up in. And so, you look over the stairs, hey! You know, Parisians don't tend to do that. I will never do that again. I'm Parisian.
So, I mean, that's a nice segue into my last question, which is an indication for you to all start thinking of the questions you want to ask of Jayne, and there'll be a microphone available for those brave souls who want to ask Jayne a question. So how did this whole French experience change you as an Australian? Has it had an impact on your identity? I mean, you were saying just a moment ago that in a way you always felt more French, you always identified with the kind of more emotional aspects of their cultural life, or what's happened since you've been back here? What's going on? Who are you, Jayne?
Who am I? Tell me. It's funny actually, because over the time, so in Paris or Die, I just desperately wanted to disappear. I didn't want to be Australian anymore. I wanted to be French. You know, I'd go on the metro and go like that so that people would think I was French, you know, and it was ridiculous. I was never going to pass for a French person, but I thought that I could, and I just desperately wanted to. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to get rid of this nice Australianness. In the second book and in that middle period, I'm starting to understand. I still do a bit work in advertising in French agencies, and I remember spending a lot of time trying very hard to act like I wasn't Australian, and certainly to just hide everything about me. I sort of became a bit of a robot. And then there was a point where I think I can't remember what happened. Someone just sort of said, why do you not want to be Australian? Like, we love it. Being Australian is great. And, but I just wanted to bury that old self. I think it's almost like I had 3 lives. Like, the first life was until Mum died, and then the second life was till the accident, and then this is the third life. And I think in the third life, I'm so grateful, and I'm definitely, I definitely, one of the things I've learned from France is that to just be more direct, and to I don't know. I can't really tell anymore. I think I feel like I've become more Australian in a way, like more happy with. It was almost like I had to leave Australia and leave the Australian self behind in order to see, it's great. And have that confidence now in France, when I do work in France, is to just be that person in that other language as well. So instead of trying to be French me, you know, I just be my Australian me in French, which I had to probably spend, 10 years in order to gain the confidence to be able to do that. Yeah. Is that a very complicated way of answering your question? No, it's just a bit of a continuum. I think it's changing all the time. But I grew up a lot in those 10 years, from like absolute French disappearance to like starting to go, maybe my Australian boyfriend and I can make a way here without having to sort of chuck our whole way of being, and then to this place of sort of feeling quite comfortable. I mean, France has changed a lot as well. Paris has changed a lot. Paris is much more welcoming. When I first went, when I was 22, like if you even spoke English at all, you would be, and even then when you spoke French, they would. Now it's like you can't get a French word in with before someone speaks to you in English. But I'm French, can't you tell?
Actually, there's a great bit in the book where you're trying to pass as French, and I think it might be Adrian or someone who says to you, "No, you've got a smile in your voice, even when you're speaking in French, and that smile gives you away as not French."
That frickin' smile, and you try and iron it out, but it's there.
That's the Australianness, maybe. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. It's the enthusiasm.
Yeah.
You're enthusiastic. So your voice goes up and down all the time.
We're an enthusiastic people.
We are.
And we're going to have some enthusiastic audience members now asking you questions. Who's going to be first? Let's see a hand. There we go. Straight, and the microphone's coming over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jayne. Tonight's been fantastic. I just wondered if you would consider living in France, Paris, again, any time, for any length of time.
Yes. We always are discussing it. We moved back when our daughter Frankie was 4, and she was born in Paris and she was raised there as a little kid, and she kind of decided herself actually that she might like to live in Australia, and we thought, it is hard raising a child in a culture, you know, when you ran around climbing trees as a kid, and, you know, Frankie had never had a skinned knee, and I was just like, this is insane. So we moved back, and ever since we've there was a time where we were doing 6 months here, 6 months there, until recently we after COVID, during COVID, we ended up staying, but we were halfway towards moving back. To answer your question, yes, all the time. And it's really a matter of what is happening, I think, in terms of, we're going back next 2 weeks actually, and taking our daughter back, and she's at the stage where she's going to high school next year, and she's growing more curious about, you know, the world, and the world that she connects with over there as well. So I feel like we're kind of, even though COVID really stopped that, and also the way the world is now with, you know, you feel terrible for flying and travelling. I feel like there may be periods where we spend time here and there, but there was a point, I used to tear my hair out thinking, are we going to live here or there? And now there's something happened along the way where we just realised we're probably just going to always live a bit between the two. When Frankie's older and has finished school, or, you know, maybe we'll end up living there again when we're old, maybe. It's definitely bitten into the deep layer of the self, and we feel still connected to it, so I'd still live there. Yeah.
And I believe you've got a show coming up there.
Yes. Well, I've been invited from the Ville de Paris, the city of Paris, to go back for a month to work on a version of the show for a French audience. So meaning, I don't know, I've been thinking about, like, will I turn it into French? I think that, for example, I'll probably open the show with reading the opening part in French. But it will be, I was actually saying to Maria before, it's going to be interesting because it's almost like this show is about Paris, but for them it's going to be about Australia, I think, in lots of ways. Like this Australian unit who's gone over and gone to this theatre school and then taken their way of being to court, you know, like. So I'm intrigued to explore that. And then, the show will be performed in October.
Fantastic. I was a bit cheeky and snuck in an extra question of my own then, but I am looking forward to hearing another question from an audience member right now. If there's someone else with... Yes, here we go. There's a microphone on the way.
What was that?
When can we expect Point Lonsdale or die?
Point Lonsdale or die? That I can adapt the show to suit Point Lonsdale. That's what it can be. Do you know that there was a time when... I remember there was an article in the paper about Paris or Die, and someone rang the bookshop, because Matt and I run the bookshop in Queenscliff, and said, have you got the book Lonnie or Die? No, Paris to Point Lonsdale. Paris to Lonnie. And Matt said, do you mean Paris or Die? And the woman was like, no, Paris to Lonnie. I wonder what can happen. Maybe I get my head cut off by the, I don't know, lighthouse or something, like the light going around.
Or it might not be so dark.
Maria's like, maybe there won't be a decapitation in that one. Maybe she'll just swim in the water and be happy.
We could, consider that.
Does that have duende?
Well, yeah. I don't think you could do something that didn't have it. Just
Highest compliment.
Do we have any other questions for Jayne, who's currently working on the third memoir, as she said? So we have a potential workaholic here on the stage. What are your writing hours? What are your working hours? Is there a routine, or is it more chaotic than that?
I think if I ever had some kind of like reasonable structure, you know, I don't know if I'd know how to deal with it. I'd probably waste the time. No, it's so... I mean, I just had a week at Varuna with a wonderful woman, Nicole, in the audience. And that, when I go away like that, I just work so well. I just focus. And I think that's probably where I get most of my work done. I have a feeling that you might be more like sit down and work regular hours.
Finish,
yes, with a beautiful wood
boring
desk. Yeah. But no, I'm all over the shop. You know, I'm working at night, I work in the morning, I grab an hour here, I grab, you know, in the beginning I need time to a real chunk of time, like Varuna. I had a residency in France at the beginning of the year where I had a month, and that was amazing, just to completely try and pull it out of the depths. And now I'm chipping away a little bit more so I can do it in small hours, but there's no sense of sanity at all to it. It's just
I'm sure there's some sanity. Well, if there's not...
No.
That stopped you in. Okay, all right, it's a terrible process, but a very effective one.
Yes.
If you haven't read Jayne's books, I do encourage you to do so. You'll fall in love with her, and I'm sure you already did today, watching her on the stage. And speaking personally, I can't wait to read the third one, and I'm sure that there are people in the audience too who are waiting on that third memoir. But is there another question? No?
Oh, Glennie.
Yes, there is. Oh, sorry about that.
This is not to degrade your book at all, Jayne, but I was very impressed with your very interesting structure of your sex life over there. And knowing you as a young child...
The structure of my sex life?
Knowing you as a young child, I was quite interested the way
Too
you
much
express it.
information.
Very articulate, I might say. But I just wanted to ask you, there was an experience really where some of the bodily fluid hit a painting. Now, my question to you is, what happened to the painting, or was it a duende?
Oh, I like it. There was definitely duende to that, the bodily fluids. But it was the little boy had done this painting of me, a stick sea creature. And the sound of it, of the bodily fluid going across the room and slashing the piece of paper was something that I'll never forget. So the artwork, I think it dried quite well, and maybe the work crinkled slightly, but the value of the work was not diminished. Yes, there was a definite life and death spurt to that.
Well, I diplomatically referred to them as romances, but they're also, maybe we can call it a new genre, the erotic memoir. No, they're good fun. They're absolutely a bit of everything, including what you've just heard there. Well, that is pretty much all we have time for tonight. Matt and Jasmine, you may have seen, are here from the bookshop at Queenscliff selling copies of Jayne's books, and I believe Jayne will be sitting at the signing table.
Apparently that's the table there.
People who want to get your autograph. And of course, Jayne's memoirs are also available to borrow from Geelong Regional Libraries. And just a final note, tonight's session has been recorded, as was the performance. So if you want to watch it again, or if you want to recommend it to friends or family, that will be available on the library's YouTube site in the next couple of days. But for now, thank you all for being here, and please join me in thanking Jayne for her wonderful performance.
Thank you.
Tonight.
Thank you for staying. Thank you. Thank you so much.